From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Cole on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you today for joining me for another episode of Cole on Congress. Today I'm pleased to have with me as our special guest newly sworn in Congressman James Lankford. James was elected to represent Oklahoma's 5th District, which covers the Oklahoma City area, and most recently was served by Governor Mary Fallin. He'll serve on the Budget Committee as well as the committees on Oversight and Government Reform and Transportation and Infrastructure. Jim, it's great to have you here. And again, you probably were one of the more unlikely winners in the last go-round. So obviously you're quite well known now in the 5th District of Oklahoma, won the primary, won the runoff, won the general election handsomely. But in other parts of the state, they may not know you quite as well. So why don't we start off and give us a little bit of overview of who James Lankford is and how you got to Congress.
Yeah, got to Congress by winning the highest number of votes. Let me just go ahead and clarify that one. But
Fair enough.
Fair enough on that. But my background is a little different than typical in politics. I've been the director of the Falls Creek camp since 1996, been on staff there since 1995. And of course, that camp, we have 51,000 guests there during the course of the summer. And I've worked with families and with teenagers and college students since 1995 across Oklahoma. So I've engaged serving people in a little different way than is what is typical. But in 2008, my wife and I both of us really sensed God was calling us to do this. And I know that may sound odd to some people, but for us, this was a journey where we really felt compelled that we need to step into the political world. Not run for any office ever before, not even student council in high school, but I've always been very passionate about the issues.
You know, there's two politicians I'd actually compare you with, and the popular perception about both of them is wrong, and that's Steve Largent and J.C. Watts. Okay. And a lot of people, particularly outside Oklahoma, even in Oklahoma, all think they won because they were very notable athletes. Obviously, J.C., great Sooner quarterback, and Steve, one of the great pro receivers of all time, Hall of Fame caliber. But both of them are really people of faith. And both of them, I used to be asked all the time, was it football with Watts? I said no. It was speaking at FCA events and Baptist youth groups all across the state for years. Really built him a very unusual network. And again, Steve Largent had a very similar type of background in terms of faith commitment. And each of them were able to mobilize lots of people that don't normally care that much about politics or have a casual interest, but they really knew those two individuals as individuals and respected their character and their bent to service, and they just gave them an unbeatable grassroots network. You had something like that in the 5th District.
There were a lot of people that engaged with us that we had served in other ways practically. They knew me, they knew my family, and so there was the trust background. You weren't just somebody that just showed up and I saw you for the first time on the television on some commercial. They knew us. And so that does provide some benefit as far as interacting, but then they had to hear the other side of it. A lot of people I talked to said, okay, I know who you are. I don't know what you think about any of these issues. And so we started from ground zero on that. And that made for an interesting conversation.
Well, that's one of the great places I think you really came across well in the campaign. I remember talking to an official with a major Oklahoma energy company, and they were aligned with one of the candidates in the race. And they had hosted a forum on energy issues, and they didn't know whether you knew very much about them. And this individual later told me, actually before the campaign was over, he said, I got to tell you, everybody there, most of the people worked in our company, they knew where we were at as a company or as corporate leadership. They all flocked around Lankford, and he did the best job at the event. And then you were very nice to him. He mentioned this in particular. You came up to him afterward and said, look, I understand where you're at. I understand why that is. I hope as the campaign goes on, particularly if I'm able to get in runoff, you give me a second look. And you did that with a lot of people, and I think you became obviously the first choice of a very strong and committed group of people, but you became a lot of people's second choice too, because they got to know you, even though they'd been committed someplace else in the process. They thought, well, my guy doesn't get it. I'm very comfortable with James Lankford.
Well, character matters. It really does. Just I need to know that when that person goes, they're going to make good decisions, and they're going to make right decisions. But competence also matters. And so hopefully when we're coming across, we're not just come across as a leader with good character, but someone who's actually competent in the issues as well.
Well, I think, there your particularly your website, your Facebook efforts, those things really, really made an enormous impact because people got to hear you sort of unscripted talking about the issues. What do I think about defense? What do I think about energy policy? What ought we to do to get our fiscal house in order? And in the entire course of the campaign, I don't just say this to you because you're on the show. I've heard other people say it, and I think it's true. It's pretty easy in politics because the mic's around you a lot to say something you wish you hadn't said.
Right.
Something that sort of gets away from you. You've never made that mistake. I've never heard you say one thing that you had to apologize for, let alone that Look, I've uttered plenty of what I call eye rollers in my career, where I can just sit and go, "Oh my gosh," particularly my staff. And you haven't done that. So you just come across as a guy that knows what he believes, can explain it, and is very, very thoughtful about it.
I'm good. I take the issues very seriously, and I want to represent as well. I mean, that's the key thing. There's 750,000 people in the 5th Congressional District, and I want to be able to represent those folks well.
Well, you're off to a great start here. I mean, your committees are some of the most important in Congress, and some that will put you really in the middle of the national debate on, I think, one of the most consequential questions, probably the most consequential question of our time, which is how we get our fiscal house in order as a country. And on the Budget Committee, as a member with that, working with Chairman Paul Ryan, you're going to play a pretty integral role in shaping the first Republican budget.
Right.
It'll come out probably sometime in April. So give me some thoughts about where you think we need to go budget-wise and how that process is starting to shape up for you.
Yeah, the budget's a big deal for me to get a chance to land on that committee because a lot of the conversation that I had with people was related to debt. Everyone that I interacted with in one way or another said to me, we have got to slow down our spending. We've got to, they weren't saying, let's go tax more, let's make up the difference. They were saying the same thing. We cannot keep spending like this. My family's not spending like this. My budget's, in my own business budget's not spending this way. Why are we doing this? And I had the same questions they did. There are surely places in the federal budget that we can begin cutting back and start looking at how we handle this better. So I am very honored to be a part of that national conversation and represent our district to say, all right, not how we're going to do this draconian as everybody talks about, not how we're going to just start willy-nilly cutting everything, but thoughtful, process-oriented, going through the budget and saying, what can we just not afford to do anymore?
Well, the Republican Pledge to America commits us as a Congress, and certainly the Republican Conference, to putting us on a path toward a balanced budget and eventually paying down the debt. It doesn't say we can do it today or tomorrow, but we're going to make the decisions to get us there, just as we did in the 1990s, although the situation today, honestly, is much graver than it was then. Some of the things, and I know it's early in the process, probably not fair to hit you with this because those committee meetings are just starting, but intuitively, where are some of the areas you think we need to look at to restrain spending?
Sure. You're right on the statement, we're not going to get there all in a year. And there are some people that are saying, great, we're going to run the budget and we'll get back in balance in a year. That's just not going to happen. We've got to come up with $1.4 trillion in a reduction in spending to be able to get us back on balance. You can't get there in a year to do this. So this is a multi-year process. We didn't get into this mess in a year. We're not going to get out of it in a year. And so this is going to take some time to be able to get out of it. The first thing I think we need to look at, though, are areas where the federal government is doing something that's really the state's responsibility. If the EPA is trying to do this, but it's really the Department of Environmental Quality or Water Resources Board, that they're the ones that should be doing that, why is the EPA doing that at all? That just creates redundancy. It slows down the process of decision making, and it creates this whole new layer of employees and of regulators and of systems that are out there that we shouldn't be doing in the first place. And then finding redundancy even within the government, that ag has the same responsibility that EPA has, that somebody else has, and say, okay, who's really got this? Because a business leader is saying, I've got to now contact 3 different groups to be able to get permission to do something within my business. Can't there be just one person that helps make this decision, or one entity that makes this decision? And I think it's reasonable.
Well, I think one of the areas, I serve on the oversight subcommittee over EPA on appropriation. I can assure you there's going to be major cuts coming. But, we began even a couple years ago in a fight there over something very important in Oklahoma. That's the EPA's effort to start regulating hydraulic fracturing. Absolutely critical to the oil and gas industry, and something that is not a new technology. It's been around since the 40s, something that we regulate very well in Oklahoma and Texas, Louisiana. Our drinking water's fine. But we've got new areas of exploration that we're opening up now in the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania and New York. They haven't had to worry about these things before. And so the EPA, in its infinite wisdom, is thinking about a federal regulatory system, even though we've drilled 1 million wells using this technology with no discernible problem for the environment. Even Lisa Jackson, the administrator for the EPA, will admit that. So I think we're going to take your dictum in a very practical way on the Appropriations Committee and start whacking away at that. That agency grew in a single year by over 39%. Single year increase in its budget and scope.
And there's no way you can say that in the past couple of years they've just been throwing money at that agency and saying, go spend it, go do more regulations, go do add people, that it's been in a way that anyone would look at and say that's the right way to do it.
Now, have you had the chance to interact much with Paul Ryan, the chairman of the Budget Committee, because he's clearly, one of the bright rising stars, not just in the Republican Party or in Congress, but nationally, and a guy that has been a leader in creative thinking about how you deal with budgetary issues really now for about a decade on the Hill.
Right, I have, and just been interacting, so far in leading up into our committee meetings and getting a chance to interact with him on that and some of the ideas. Obviously his roadmap plan that he's put out there that has been a pretty bold plan to say, okay, let's start the conversation here. That's not everything is going to be instituted in that, but it's a starting point for the conversation to say, where do we go from here? Let's start taking ideas rather than someone just saying hypothetically, let's come up with some idea. Let's start with an idea and then figure out how to tweak it. So he's been great. Of course, he's in Oklahoma all the time. He's married to an Oklahoma girl. He says that he comes several times a year for different seasons like turkey season and deer season.
Oh, he kills most of the game in my district. I'm absolutely convinced. We're happy to have him down there, but there's nothing left to hunt in Marshall County after he's been down there.
He's coming from Wisconsin and coming and killing our wild game.
Well, he and Dan Boren together, are quite I'd hate to be a deer or a turkey or something in season if those two guys were stalking me. And they have a family relationship as well as a friendship. Well, you also landed on another committee that's going to be incredibly important in grappling with government, which we all think is too big, spends too much, and meddles too much, and that's the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. And there you're going to have an awfully unique role for a freshman. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
I will. Very honored. They've asked me to be a chairman of one of the subcommittees. The subcommittee's on technology and government procurement, but it goes all the way through. It goes into things like unfunded mandates. It's how we spend money, how we do our contracting, and how we purchase items with any federal government agency. We have $87 billion just in service contracts as the federal government. We have a lot of contracts, and I just don't think there's been aggressive oversight in the last several years from Congress, and that's one of the key responsibilities from Congress. This is not a big gotcha game to say, okay, the Republicans are now here, let's go after the administration. It's a basic function of Congress. We set the laws, make the legislation, and the executive branch writes the regulation. And if that regulation doesn't match our legislation, then we have the responsibility to say, no, that's not consistent with what we're asking you to do, and how you're spending the money. So we're gonna do some pushing on that.
Well, there too, you've got another great chairman. Darrell Issa is one of the smartest, toughest guys in Congress. For those of our viewers and listeners that don't know, Darrell served his country with distinction, was an Army Ranger, but didn't have any money, and went out into private business, founded the Viper car alarm system, and as a multi-millionaire, very, very successful business guy who honestly could be doing a lot of other things other than coming to Congress. And the fact that he has, and he is, as you know from your exposure to him already, he brings a businessman's sense of priorities and cost to this kind of job. I think he'll be a very different kind of chairman, with all due respect to those who were there before. He's not trying to score political points. Right. He's really trying to, give the government the kind of thorough overview that any CFO would give a company.
Right. When you interact with Darrell Issa and you talk to him for any length of time at all, you understand this person's here for the right reasons. He's here, he really wants to make a difference. He really wants to get things done, and to be able to pull government out of the oversight of business and allow business to be business and the government to do its job of setting the boundaries and then to be able to get out of the way. And that's just part of our role. It is very interesting. I don't know if you've seen some of the new things that the Obama administration is now putting out, saying we're going to go in and we're going to start a top-to-bottom look and putting out an executive order that's coming out to say we're going to look over all the regulations and all the agencies and we're going to find areas of efficiency. It's very interesting timing on that, right as Darrell Issa begins his process of saying we're going to do this look from the legislative side. The executive side is now saying, no, I tell you what, we'll do it. It kind of does feel like the fox watching the hen house on that one, and it reminds me somewhat of Al Gore and his push to reduce paperwork among the federal agencies to say we're going to make this more efficient. It's not really the executive branch's role to be able to do that. That is the legislative branch's role to be able to step in and say, we have oversight over those things. Let us engage in the process.
Well, I tell you, they've certainly been insensitive to how little they've done until this moment when I think Darrell and your committee caught their interest. I'll tell you one interesting story. I was having a breakfast meeting one morning with a major CEO of an American railroad who has extensive interest in Oklahoma. He was telling me he sits on the Business Roundtable, and they'd met with Peter Orszag when he was director of the budget office, since gone, and they were all, this was senior American business leaders, all complaining about this or that in tax policy. And Orszag says, well, at least we haven't caused you any problems in the regulatory area. And every hand in the room shot up. And they each one started giving examples of where they were, being regulated inappropriately. And Orszag was taken aback. He said, well, why don't you guys get together, send me a letter. They sent him a 62-page letter of all these major areas, but just one, which is worth noting. This particular railroad, doesn't have interest in Mexico, but hauls, a lot of freight to the Mexican border and picks it up from the Mexican border. And they, on one occasion, picked up a Mexican train and then they moved 300 yards in the country, and then they stopped for a customs inspection and a scrubbing to make sure all this cargo is okay. Well, there were drugs in the cargo that had been sent. They were fined $8 million. Now, they hadn't loaded it. Wow. They hadn't been responsible. They'd moved 300 yards and stopped and opened it up. And yet this administration, rather than looking at the source, was hitting a company to the point they said, look, we may get out of this business in terms of hauling freight to and from Mexico altogether. We can't afford that. And it's just silly, things like that. Unbelievable.
It makes you beg the question, are the regulations and the permits there to try to shut down business, or are they there to try to provide good, safe boundaries for business to be able to thrive under? It looks more and more like the regulations exist to shut down an industry rather than to support free enterprise within that industry.
Well, I think that's going to be one of the real battles with this Congress, because I think clearly, the president can no longer move legislation through a Congress without Republican cooperation. That wasn't true in the first 2 years. And so they're clearly going to try and do a lot of things that they could never get through a Republican-leaning Congress or a conservative Congress with regulations and with administrative activism, if you will.
Right. And it's very interesting to note Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, where it lays out the powers that's to be given to this brand new government in the Constitution. It begins with all legislative powers shall reside in Congress. Now, it's fascinating to me to say, of all the places they could begin in the Constitution by outlining what's the role of this new government, they begin with who has the power to write legislation. And it was clearly defined right off the bat. It's within Congress. That's where it begins. It's not in any other branch. It's within Congress. And that is some of the pull of the past several years of who will write the rules for the nation. Is it really Congress, or is the executive branch really going to run business and to run the nation based on the regulation? The framers would look at it and say that's not their role. It is clearly the role of Congress. It's time we begin to pull that back and say it's not that laws are bad, it's that they're being written by the wrong people. So.
Let me ask you about your third committee, which is incredibly important to Oklahoma, transportation and infrastructure. I mean, obviously we sit at the crossroads of America. Your district, two of the major interstates in the country intersect. There's major railroad connections that move through there. And obviously we have major airports there. Right. We train air traffic controllers from all over the world there. So your district is really one of the transportation hubs in America. So tell me what your priorities are going to be on T&I.
That's great. This is one of those areas where Mary Fallon has been on this committee for the last 4 years. And then I get a chance to follow in, as I'm saying, I'm following in her footsteps, but not walking in her shoes through this process. But to get a chance to walk in and say the 5th District will still have a representative at the table on transportation. And I'll be the only one that's of the Oklahoma House delegation that is, in fact, in all 3 of these committees. So we have good diversity across it. But that allows me to be able to walk in the transportation area and say, we've got to look at our roads, we've got to look at our pipelines are in this committee. You already mentioned aviation's in this committee. But one thing a lot of people leave out on that is also water. We have a lot of water issues that are happening within Oklahoma right now. There's a widespread conversation. So things like hydraulic fracking, how we handle groundwater, a lot of those things land in that transportation committee.
Well, and in eastern Oklahoma, people forget Kerr McClellan Waterway is a major artery where we move grain, all sorts of product, fertilizer, a lot of things out of Oklahoma, a lot of products move cheaply and easily because we've got that asset in eastern Oklahoma.
Right. And it's one of those areas that, again, there's been a lot of debate. People talk about bipartisanship, but even when Congress was very, very partisan and the Democrats were running the House and the Senate, they were not moving legislation through to get things finished. The current aviation authorization that's out there, the last one that was done in 2007. There's been 17 continuing resolutions just to continue the funding for aviation. We have got to finish up and give some basic stability to what we're going to do in aviation. So FAA, our airports, so people actually know how to plan. People can't run a business when they only have funding for the next 3 or 4 months. And you can't do that if there are 17 of those in a row where you never know what the funding is. So we've got to get some things done. For instance, this aviation piece and get the actual authorizations out so people know how to plan on that. The highway funding bill is also overdue. We've got to get that resolved. So this is part of just the grunt work of Congress. It's not all that sexy and exciting to go through, but it's the basics that people are going to know how to plan. The Gary Ridleys of the world and the Department of Transportation and folks in aviation, they have to be able to know what's happening 2 years from now, not 2 months from now, and so they can actually do real planning. So let's get some of those things done.
Let me ask you a couple of other areas, not so much on your committees, but just you came in with a very unusual group of freshmen. Obviously it's the largest Republican contingent since 38. It's one of the larger new groups of members moving in. It switched power in the Congress. Give me your take on your class, and sort of what its mood is, what its aims are, what kind of impact you think it'll have on Congress.
I've had a lot of people that have asked me that exact question. I'll be back in Oklahoma and they'll say, okay, tell me about the freshmen, because they see them on the news and these bits and pieces, and they say, are these wild guys with pitchforks and running through the hallways? And I laugh and I think, no, we really look like America. As odd as that sounds, it feels like the House of Representatives looks like the United States of America as well. We have camp directors like me. We have a few attorneys. I know that may surprise people. There are a few lawyers that were elected as well. We have pizza.
Oh, it surprised them that there's only a few.
Yes, yeah. We have pizza owners, pizza restaurant owners. We have funeral directors. We have car dealers. We have people that were mayors. We have about 20 some odd veterans that were elected this time. We're a very diverse group. And there are people from all walks of life. If you think, okay, is there an occupation that's lined up with that? Yes. I think there are 17 physicians that are now in the House. And a bunch of them were elected in this group that are freshmen. There are people from all walks of life, all different types, both from service all the way into professional areas that are now a part of this House. And when we walk around, we interact and talk normal. Where we're interacting with each other and saying, here are the things I'm thinking about, and how's your family, and what's going on, and what are the people back home, what are they talking about? And those are the things that we're talking about. And the biggest thing that comes up every time the freshmen are together is the national debt. I mean, that's the one thing that everybody talks about. We did not come here to extend debt and to continue to add on this. We also understand we can't solve it in a few months. There aren't 87 freshmen going to walk in and say, okay, here's where to find $1.4 trillion worth of waste that we can clear in the next couple of months. But we do have to start us down a path on that. And what's been great, honestly, is that we've run a lot of leadership, you included, that they're saying, yes, that's already the path we want to go on. So many people have said to me, boy, y'all are going to have to really beat against the establishment to get things done. And in reality, we've walked in and a lot of the quote-unquote establishment have said, we are so excited you're here. we are ready to start getting some things done that we had been prohibited from getting done, starting with spending.
Well, I think people do forget the last budget of a Republican Congress had a deficit, which I'm sad, but it was $167 billion. And that was that. We were actually, if we weren't in Iraq and Afghanistan, we would have had a surplus. Or if you didn't count the interest on the debt, we operationally actually had a surplus. And we'd brought the deficit down for 3 consecutive years before that. So a lot of the blowback on Congress, I really do think, begins with the Democratic takeover in 2007 and then accelerates when we lose an executive check as well at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. So, but it's good. I mean, again, I think even Republicans who consider themselves fiscally conservative, like I do, appreciate the intensity of the focus in this class, because it will change the nature of deliberations. It already has. And certainly, I think people have worked to try and give freshmen a bigger role than they've traditionally had here, because they understand the country's sending us a loud and clear message in the form of these people. They need to be able to visibly be moving in that direction, so Congress itself demonstrates that it's responsive.
Right. Well, there are several. And for instance, for me, ending up as a chairman of one of the subcommittees, I understand is a significant honor, and it's something that's rare for a freshman to be able to step in and do, and I understand that. But we also walk in with a real intensity to say, I didn't come here for the title of congressman. I came here because of the task and a sense of calling for my own life and my family's life. We came here to get some things done. When I get on an airplane now and fly away from my wife and my 2 daughters, I don't do that because I love flying away from my wife and my 2 daughters. But my whole family feels a calling to do this, and we're going to go after the task and try to get some things done.
That's true. Well, let me close asking you a little bit about our own delegation and how that's working out for you. I think there's a lot of excitement that you're here, quite frankly, because I think all of us on both sides of the aisle recognize this is a very significant class. Right. It's going to shape Congress for a long time, and honestly, we all hated to lose Mary Fallin, although I'm sure she's very happy to be governor. But we were all pretty excited to get you because you're going to be part of that movement and give Oklahomans a direct link into what's going to be a very powerful class moving ahead.
And it is a terrific group of people. And we will line up very well. Our values as a delegation in Oklahoma, when you look around the 87 freshmen that are there, we line up very well with their values and with their core. There are a lot of people of very high character that are in this group. And there are a lot of people that are very passionate just about people. They really do come from very normal backgrounds.
As I tell people at home, in this time of enormous instability in the country, where we've had 3 wave elections in a row, 2 that benefited Democrats in 06 and 08, 1 that benefited Republicans, lots of personnel change. Right. Other than you, we've been sort of an island of stability in a sea of change politically in the country.
Right. So we have the opportunity to carry the ball on that one. Let's see how we do. Right now, you put the pressure on me. Say I never say anything that is a gaffe that makes people roll their eyes. So adds additional
and
pressure.
You've gotten through another 28 minutes. If you can just sweat a few more seconds, but you really haven't. And again, I think from a delegation standpoint, you really are wonderful in reconnecting all of us. You can get a little weary up here too,
sure.
And if you're not careful, this is an easy place to suck you in. So having the energy and the idealism you bring, I think, has helped every other single member that's in the delegation. So we're awfully proud of it.
I'm part of a team, and I understand that, and glad to be a part of it, and honored to be in that role.
Well, great. And again, we'll do this again sometime. I want it like a mid-year report or something after you've gotten in.
See if my idealism is all gone by then.
You bet. But thanks, and again, welcome to Congress.
Thank you.
You bet.